If only you could hear the banter that Matthew Fairburn and I have on our way in to doing the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show. Yes, the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show is back here on January 9th, 2025. We are live. First time in a while. First time in the calendar year 2025. Thanks, everyone, for hopping in. On your way in, if you're watching on YouTube, if you could please hit that like button, subscribe to this channel. You can find the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, leave a 5-star review. Blasting this out to X tonight, Matthew Fairburn. If you are over on X, come on over to YouTube. That's where the fun is. That's where the chat is always kind of bouncing around. They are always talking, not always to us, often to each other. That's the place to be. If you're coming over from X and it's your first time visiting YouTube, hit that notification bell, by the way, so you know when Matthew and I go live. All right. So, Matthew, it's been a while since you and I last spoke on this show. I think it was December 23rd was
we
last time.
Talked since last year.
I know. You and I have talked. True. But we haven't talked in this forum. Yeah, since last year. That's right. We've had a World Junior Championship in between. USA. To our Canadian friends. Sorry. To our Canadian friends.
That was a tough one.
That was a tough one, man. That was a tough one. On home turf. My heart bleeds for the Canadians. But no, Sabres, what was it? They lost 13 in a row, won 3, lost 3. And I think they're now back after tonight's victory over Ottawa. Nice win over the Ottawa Senators. They now won 2 in a row, beating 2 pretty good teams. Washington. And tonight, 4-0 victory in Ottawa, UPL with the shutout. 35 of 35, I think it was. That number can always change. Paint's still fresh on that game, and the shots on goal seemingly do disappear. But overall, I thought that interesting game tonight for the Sabres. We don't need to, be hyper focused on the game tonight, but since it is fresh, Sabres go 11-7 tonight, 11 forward, 7D. Managing some injuries, managing some guys being sick, a little bit of, I don't know if there's a bug going around. I guess I'll let you kind of get to that when I throw it over to you. But I thought this was a game tonight. It was a good game to see some guys that the Sabres need to get going. Jack Quinn gets a pair of goals early. Dylan Cousins gets one. McLeod, who's actually looked pretty good the past couple of games, he gets a goal tonight. Those are guys that you need to get going. But, here's in full disclosure, since you and I last spoke on December 23rd, I was kind of focused on World Juniors and became a little bit more of a casual observer of the team, not living and dying by every practice and press conference and line retool and everything else. So I'm ramping my way back up. This show is you bringing me up to speed, as well as our friends in the chat. So Matthew, where are you at here with this team? Since, what are you feeling? What's changing? Kind of where are you at with the team following tonight's game and the past couple of games?
They are playing much better since the streak ended, since that 10-3 streak dropped them to the bottom of the Eastern Conference. They are still at the bottom of the Eastern Conference right now, but 5-2-1, I believe, since the 13-game winless streak ended. And they basically are back to looking like the team that we saw before that streak started. Not a great, top of the conference team, but a, team that could have hung around the fringe of the wild card race. As it stands, they are very much a long shot, but the rest of the Eastern Conference is such a mess that they're able to at least talk themselves into the idea that they're somewhat in the mix. They're still in last place in the Eastern Conference, but the gap between them and the playoffs isn't as big as you would expect, considering the month that they had without winning a game. So, like a lot of people that are out there watching, all I can sit there and wonder is why this version of the team disappeared for a while. And like I said, this is not a top of the Eastern Conference team that they're performing like, but they're performing like a team that should have been around the middle of the pack in the league not a team that should be last in the conference. So a little over halfway through the season, we'll see what they can do with the remaining 40 games on their schedule, I guess.
Yeah, Sabres 42 games in after tonight's victory, 16-21-5 is the record, good for 37 points. To Matthew's point, still in the cellar of the Eastern Conference. So, yeah, I guess where do you go from here, right? I mean, there's been that 13-game winless skid, I guess we'll call it, man. That just makes it tough. But yeah, to your point, I mean, 7 points out of the wild card right now. And I mean, that's the other thing. Like, I'm looking at that right now for the first time in a couple of weeks, because after those 13 games, I wasn't even looking at the standings. Like, we were looking every day. You know, we talked about that little run up to Thanksgiving, and then it's shocking, right? It's shocking that they're still just 7 points out. Now, I know that they've played 42. Most of the teams between the Sabres and that final wild card spot, which is Columbus, by the way. Columbus, with a 524 points percentage, is occupying that final wild card spot right now with 44 points. But most of the teams have like 40 games played. So a lot of work to do still. That 7 comes with an asterisk, right? Is that kind of what we're thinking right now? But no, I like the way that they played tonight. I like the way that they played against Washington with some headwinds. You know, Malenstein's sick, right? Samuelson's sick tonight. Obey-Kubel was, I think, just a healthy scratch. Kind of interesting to see them. What did you think of the roster construction tonight with the 7D? And Gilbert was actually a pretty useful tool for Lindy Ruff tonight, don't you think?
I think Lindy Ruff knows how to read the room pretty well in these situations, knows the games where he might need Gilbert, and he knows that Ottawa is one of those games. And it actually, I think, worked out really well, because Brady Tkachuk had that, borderline hit on Jason Zucker early in the game. He got called for charging. Not long after that, Gilbert sort of stepped up on him and answered for it, tried to, get him to go a little bit, but they ended up fighting later in the game. But it was to have a guy like that out there willing to step up and kind of quiet the game down a little bit, I think really helped the Sabres quite a bit, because we've seen this matchup get a little bit out of hand in the past, and Brady Tkachuk and some of his teammates can really just turn the game into chaos. I think they thrive in that. Sabres, that's not really their game, but they now have a guy on their side who can play that a little bit. So I think Dennis Gilbert has been, I think tonight was his 15th game, I believe, of the season. So obviously he's a part-time, very much a niche role player, but he, when called upon, has done what they've needed him to do. Maybe he gets a little bit more of a look. It's a crowded picture there at the bottom of the defensive depth chart, and you don't want to overuse him either, right? Because I think we've seen when they've done that, that's when he started to have, a bad game here and there. When he comes in fresh and energized with something to prove, he's been a nice, spark plug on the blue line for them. So I think the 11-7 construction made sense from that standpoint, wanting to get him in, but maybe not wanting to overplay him, knowing that the Senators do have, some firepower, up front, and you don't want to, expose them too much.
Yeah, you got to put Gilbert on a governor, or even Lindy on a governor with how he uses Gilbert. Because to your point, when he plays too much, he defaults to bad Mike Weber, chasing hits, getting out of position, just doing some silly things. So, yeah, I'm happy to see him come in, sprinkle into the lineup selectively. It made a lot of sense tonight. Tage Thompson, no points tonight. And I think actually, yeah, since that's another development with the team, since you and I last spoke, we were December 23rd, Tage was still playing center, I think. Since then, kind of slid him over to the wing, put Cousins up there. What have you seen from both of those players on that top line with Zucker, by the way? So, Zucker had a I think a second 4-game point streak here recently. Went without points in his last 2. Zucker's been really great the last month, really all year. Let's face it. I think after the first couple of games, but he fits really well up there, I think, with Cousins and Thompson. What are you seeing from both? Are you getting a little concerned, I guess, with Thompson?
Well, Thompson is playing through something. Lindy
Mhm.
Ruff acknowledged that this week, and I think that was the thought when he moved to the wing. I know it was probably about a month ago that Lindy Ruff sort of had that open threat to Cousins
Both
and
of them.
Thompson. If
Yeah.
they didn't, handle the defensive responsibilities of center, then they wouldn't play center. But this was because he's playing through something, and because he played, he missed some time already with an injury. You wonder if that's crop back up. And let's face it, it feels like the entirety of the last 2 years he's been and even going back to the second half of his 94-point season was fighting through some injuries. Just being that big of a body, I think you're gonna see some of those. And right now, whatever it is preventing him from either handling faceoffs or the defensive responsibilities. I mean, you can speculate about what that might be and what might be preventing him from doing that. But I think the upshot is that it gives you the look, right? I think we've talked a lot about the idea of one of those guys moving to the wing. Tage makes a lot of sense because he's done it in the past and because
Yeah.
he's gotten better defensively, but it's clearly not his calling card, right? His scoring is what you like, out of his game. So I've liked the mix there. I don't mind it. I mean, Thompson tonight was pretty quiet, and I think you're going to see some ups and downs from him if he is playing injured. But it's bringing a little something out in Cousins. He had the nice goal off the turnover tonight. And Zucker, I think it was on this show over the summer when they signed him, we talked about the possibility of him playing on the top line just because they did not have a player like that, right?
Yeah, and I shot that down faster than I didn't even want him on the second line
Like
when
a net
they signed him
front,
originally. Yeah.
speedy, no nonsense guy who's willing to play both.
Savvy.
Right,
Yeah.
just an adult, like a grown NHL player, like fully formed, ready to go. And he is becoming one of the most interesting players to track in the second half of the season because as the deadline approaches, the logical move, if he's not signed to an extension, is to move him. But you kind of want more of those guys, not fewer of them. So, I believe starting January 1st, they could, start talking extension. And I'm, thinking that's something they would like to get done if they can, but
Yeah.
takes two to tango. And Zucker has had a front row seat to a mess, right? The 13-game winless streak and everything that came along with it. Is he going to be sitting here? He turns 33 next week. So he's probably wondering, how many years he has left to chase, a Stanley Cup. And does he see a path to that here in Buffalo? Does he really want to come back for another year? Money talks, right? Sabres
Yeah.
have a lot of that. So there's a way to get it done, but the way he's playing right now, he's probably opening a lot of eyes around the league. You know what he means to the team when he went down tonight. I think a lot of people thought, man, if they miss him for an extended period of time, that's kind of it, right?
Yeah.
You can't be without that guy. So credit to him because he's on pace for goal and point totals that he's only matched once in his career. And he's already got 8. He leads the team with 8 power play goals. The power play without Jason Zucker, I shudder to think what it would look like. It's not very good, but
Yeah.
without his goals at the net front, that would be a pretty bad unit. So I don't mind that top line in the mix and how they've kind of fit everything together. Injuries have definitely hurt them though up front, and they don't have the depth, and that's part of the problem that goes back to the summer, but they're making do right now.
No, they are. When I think of, and we've kind of flirted, to your point, we've flirted with the concept of Thompson as a winger in the past on this show. It's kind of something that I know, like, I feel like I've definitely advocated for Just I think, and we saw, by the way, like he makes really good plays off the wing, plays that he's not always going to make as a centerman. Maybe turning that corner with power. He did it. He made a really powerful net front drive. I think it was against Washington the last game. Didn't connect on it, but it was that mentality of keeping his feet moving, not pulling up. This Sabres team as a whole is a team that does a lot of gaining the zone, curl at the half wall, try to let the play develop, or sometimes you just got to get downhill, get to the net. And Tage is one of those guys that I want leading that charge. I think we started to see a couple plays, more so maybe, a greater volume of plays from him since the move to wing. I like it. Cousins. So like Cousins is a guy, I want to spend a little more time, I think, on Cousins because another down year, right? 2 years in a row, not playing to his potential. I've wanted to see it through with Cousins. Kind of led the show off by saying, hey, a guy that you want to see get going had a game tonight. I think he played pretty well tonight. I think he's playing really well. It's given him a boost, this move up with Tage on the wing. I don't think there's any question about that. Zucker's a big part of that. Cousins' name will not be removed from these trade lists, so I don't think, right? Like that you're going to see. Is he on Chris Johnson's trade list? I want to say that he is. Was he on there?
Don't think
or is it just Byram?
Oh, Byram was on
just
there.
Byram, which doesn't,
I
mean, I'm not really
on there. I'll double check.
My position on Cousins is because I think you're going to start to hear it more and more. I'm not interested in selling low on him. I'm interested in seeing it through with him. And I don't know. Like, I'm not willing. Like, I know that, and there's going to be a lot of people that don't like that thought. There's a lot of people that are still going to be down on him, and rightfully so. Look, they committed to him. I still see the good in his game. Sometimes I question, am I choosing to see the good in his game because I've always liked him as a player? There's probably some of that with me personally, but I would hate to see them. Look, you got to give to get, right? Every good trade's got to hurt a little. I just think that I can see forward down the line where he's so important. And, I'm going game to game with him. And I thought tonight was a good game for him and a move in the right direction. And it's not the first time we've seen him make a move in the right direction here in the past couple of weeks. So, we talked a little about, you talked about Zucker, you talked about Thompson. Are you kind of aligning with where I'm at with Cousins, or where are you at presently halfway into the season with Dylan Cousins?
I'm mostly where you are with Dylan Cousins. I broke the roster down, I think it was last week, into sort of trade tiers of, how I would categorize players. The only guy I, put as untouchable is Rasmus Dahlin. So I don't have Dylan Cousins in that category, but he's in the I'll listen, but it's going to take a lot category. Like, I'm not sitting there moving off of the value just because he's had, a couple of down seasons. He's tied up, he's under contract. I think his heart and his head are in the right place for the most part, with this team. Like, he cares, he works at it, he's competitive. He is not on the trajectory that I thought he would be or hoped, to see after the season he had a couple of years ago. But I don't know that you have a better option than seeing it through. Now, maybe a trade comes around that looks too good to pass up, but it would have to be a better player, I think, coming back for Cousins and something else for me to really think that is a good idea. One thing about Cousins playing on the top line with Thompson and Zucker, beyond just the fact that he gets to play with two, talented, proven players, like, he is playing with guys who are more experienced than he is.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like that has almost never been the case with Cousins, the entirety of his career. I kind of want at some point to stop talking about, or to have the team stop viewing and talking about Dylan Cousins as this big time leader and let him figure out his own game first, because His own game has been a bit of a mess the last couple of years. It's been all over the place, up and down. Consistency's been a problem. I feel like he's lacked an identity in his game. You know, the physicality and the edge went away for a while. It's come back a bit this year, but defensively, he has not been good on the whole this year. You know, when you just look at the numbers and where he's been, like, let this guy focus on himself. Sometimes I think he gets pulled out of himself so easily by this idea that he has to be a leader. He has to be X, Y, and Z. He's going to be the next shutdown defensive center. He's going to be this. It's like, let him, like, why doesn't he get the luxury of, you know, the more experienced line mates once in a while to see what that can bring out in his game, as opposed to him having to drag along Jack Quinn and JJ Paterka or Zach Benson and Jack Quinn and, you know, or throw Kulik on his line. You know, it's just like, let this guy have, he's still one of those young players too. And maybe taking a deep breath and not hitting the reset button on his development, but recalibrating a little bit and letting him, you know, have just a little bit of veteran insulation. I mean, it goes throughout the whole lineup, right? It's the conversation we've had about this team is that Owen Power needs an experienced, steady partner, right? Like, a lot of these guys would be better off in situations where they were surrounded by more Jason Zucker types. So I am seeing it through with Cousins. I understand the impatience 100% because he has not been nearly good enough this year. Offensively, defensively. I mean, on the power play, he's got, I think, the 5th most power play ice time on the team, and he has 2 power play points. Like,
yeah, it's disappointing. Yeah,
you know,
that sticks out like a sore thumb when you see that.
He has tons of opportunity on this team and just hasn't scored at a good enough rate. And I have not loved the way he's played, you know, away from the puck consistently either. So I get it. I get all the people that are down on him, but that's not the time to trade a guy. You know, when I'm looking at shaking up this roster, I'm not necessarily thinking of trading guys for the sake of trading them, you know, just for the sake of shaking it up. I think you got to be calculated in what you're doing. I think, you know, if you trade Dylan Cousins, how are you backfilling that, right? You know, I don't know, maybe you get down the road and you think Tage Thompson is a wing, especially as he gets older and the body gets more banged up or he loses a step speed-wise. Like, maybe that's the beauty of Tage Thompson and the game he plays, is I think he can transition that pretty easily.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you want to just give up a 23-year-old right-handed center who's, you know, top 10 draft pick and has a 60-plus point season on his resume. It's not unless you're getting a bona fide top 6 center coming back, one that's more proven than Cousins is. So it's a tough trade to make. I would look to other areas of the roster before I would look directly at Cousins, but that is probably the guy a lot of teams are calling about.
Yeah, I think, it's like you know, I'm sure even though the Sabres are not mired in this winless skid like they were a couple weeks ago, GM still think they smell blood in the water. They're going to smell blood in the water no matter what, I think, with Kevin Adams. So they're going to get calls on Cousins. The reason that I kind of wanted to get your take on Cousins is that we talked a little bit about the Vancouver situation. I think the last time we were together, or maybe 2 times ago that we were together, and it just seems like they're a mess. It's not going away. Just to reset that, you got Elias Pettersson, big contract, having the worst statistical year, I think, right now of his career. I think that he's really on pace to have like his lowest points per game total that he's had. It's kind of interesting, right? It's like we're talking about Cousins, guy who signed relatively big dollars for where he was at in his career and what he had accomplished prior to signing that contract. Now you have a guy out in Vancouver making $11 million a year. He's got all sorts of, you know, crazy signing bonuses coming up or whatever. And that's a situation that something has to give there, right? Pettersson and JT Miller can both stand up in front of the Vancouver press and say there's nothing to it. Meanwhile, everyone else that's been connected to that situation says, no, there's some tension between these guys. JT Miller is a competitor. He's a prick. He's been hard on this guy. Something's got to give there. And so, you know, and it seems like there's a connection there with Buffalo and Vancouver, right? And it's just not going away. It's like, it's still, I don't even want to say smoldering. I don't know what the right word is, but like it's not going away. And I don't think there's any pressure really to get that deal done now. But it's like the reason I wanted to get your take on Cousins, like I'd hate to see Cousins be part of that. I would put
See,
Owen Power. I would put Owen Power in that deal all day.
Sure. I would rather Owen Power and maybe something else has to go. And rather than, and I know we spoke about this, Elliot Friedman was more so spitballing than he was reporting, but it was a Cousins and Byram for
Right.
Pedersen. I'd rather Power and something else than Cousins and Byram. Part of
Me
that,
too, man.
Part of that for me is Byram. Like I'm really starting to like what I'm seeing from Bo Byram. Sample size is getting bigger. Like this is a guy, that's a guy I want in my locker room. Guy I want playing on my top pair. Guy I kind of want to see on the power play, frankly. That's the tricky part about Bo Byram's next contract and having Owen Power here. And trading Owen Power seems crazy on the surface to some, but to me, I just look at this roster building puzzle and look, you're like you said, you're going to have to give to get. And Owen Power, Kevin Adams said 31 other teams would want Owen Power, when he was speaking.
I agree with him.
I agree that 31 teams would like Owen Power at a certain number at $8.3 million. I don't know if there's 31 other teams that want Owen Power at $8.3 million.
I think
there's 31 other teams that would like to try to make that work, but there's not 31 teams that can make that work in terms of how they've put their team together. So I don't know.
Vancouver could if they're moving out 11.
Vancouver absolutely could. I mean, and that's the magnitude of a deal. Again, you're not giving up on Owen Power. You're moving Owen Power to make your team better. You're moving around assets to find a way to upgrade your roster elsewhere. You have a surplus. You have a surplus really of one thing on your team, and it's left-handed puck-moving defensemen. You've got 3 of them, and one of them needs a new contract. 2 of them already have a contract. So if you want to move one out to make your team better, like if I had to pick one to move, it would be Power.
Yeah.
And, part of that, most of it is just how they've played. Like Byram's defensive metrics are all better than Power's. This year has been the worst year for Power in terms of his expected goal share at 5-on-5. He's not producing on the power play. He is producing at even strength. But, even in terms of how, Lindy Ruff wants to play, it seems like there's been some growing pains there with the physicality in front of the net. And all these things, like, can he get there? Absolutely. He's still very young, and defensemen take a little while in the NHL. That's pretty common. But just when you're looking for that sweet spot of a guy you could move, a guy that you could afford to move and it wouldn't, damage your lineup too much, and a guy that would get you a big haul, Owen Power fits into that sweet spot. So yeah, if Vancouver is calling about Byram, I would probably pivot the conversation to Power and see, Power and what gets you Pedersen would be.
I don't know. It's not Power and Cousins. It's not, you know what I mean? Like you're in the, you're believe it or not, is maybe poorly as Cousins statistics are, you're overpaying. If it's like, even, I don't even like
absolutely.
Cousins and Byram. I don't like that. So it's like,
I don't love
you know
that.
what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah. So, and I think with the cap too, something else has to work, but it would be a lower level. It would be a 5D, a third line energy, something like that. That's what they would try to make work. I don't like a deal like that. And for me, you framed it perfectly, I think, with my thoughts on Power. I would not want to sell low on a Cousins. You have the surplus with a guy like Power, and I think he would be so attractive. And by the way, you might be able to do better than Elias Pettersson if you're committing to making that move, right?
It would be interesting if you floated him out there. And I think at this point, you have to be willing to float anybody out there outside of Dahlin, really, because
I've been saying that all year, right?
I just don't see a trade with Dahlin where you would win.
No,
and I actually put Tage Thompson just like a touch below that category, but
can't trade Luukkonen either, and that's it. Those are the 3.
Yeah, you really can't trade Luukkonen. It makes no sense whatsoever to do that. He's like the only goal you can rely upon. I don't think he's, tonight was a big one for him because I think they need a lot more of that from him if they're going to have a puncher's chance to climb out of this hole, because he has not been their problem, but he has also not been, the same Luukkonen he was at the second half of last season. But point being, to bring it back to Power, like you absolutely, I think if you're Kevin Adams at this point, not only are you listening on everybody, I'm sending out some feelers out there. And if guys in the locker room, if Owen Power or, Dylan Cousins or Jack Quinn or JJ Paterka or whoever doesn't like it, like, and I know it hasn't really worked for Kris Drury, right? This whole, like, these guys are available to, like, shake up the locker room. But at some point you have to remind these guys that it's the NHL and that this thing won't last if they continue to play like this. It's not tenable. Like either Kevin Adams won't have a job and the next guy will come in and chip some pieces out, or, changes will happen. You don't just go year after year and not make the playoffs. So the results matter, and he should be listening on everybody. The reason I like Power as a potential trade chip is because I don't think you're selling low. I don't think he's having a great year, but I
That's
don't think
my
you're selling
point.
low.
No, and I think you're selling with a lot of upside, and you can actually, I think he's very marketable. And by the way, like, I don't want to have the same conversation that we already had the last time we talked about this. So I'm not trying to, it's not, hey, Kris or Matt or that show, they're trying to trade on Power. That's not what we're saying. We're trying to say, hey, you want to have conversations with teams and see what we can really do to reshape things. And you know what I mean? Maybe chart a different path, and you're not doing a rebuild. That's the guy that gets the conversations going for me. I think some of your peers in the media want to say that it's Dylan Cousins. I don't think
Well,
it
it's Dylan
is.
Cousins or it's Bo Byram, and it's
I
kind
want
of
those
like
guys in the room, to your earlier point.
I absolutely want Bo Byram in the room, and I want Dylan Cousins. I mean, those guys as a package deal is kind of nice too, given their history, and I think, they really, like Bo Byram's likelihood of wanting to stick around in Buffalo. I don't know if it's tied to Dylan Cousins' presence, but his presence doesn't hurt, given their friendship. And I just view those guys as two guys that could be leaders down the road. I know Cousins already has the letter on his jersey, and as I already said, I don't love just this expectation that's been just placed on this kid since seemingly the moment he got here, that he's going to be he's going to be a captain. He's going to be, it's just, it all has felt very rushed, and it's felt like he's internalized it in a big way. And he just needs to be out of his head playing, worried about his game and not worried about leading and not worrying about what he's saying after each loss. I just feel like when he is just going, he can play a really fun brand of hockey. And we haven't seen it consistently enough because I feel like he's been in his head for the last 2 years. But all that to say, I think people they look at Jack Quinn. He's not playing well. Like, oh, trade Jack Quinn or trade Henry Jokiharju, right? Or trade these underperforming guys. When I think if you're actually looking about how can you reshape this roster and retool it, you have to look at some guys that you can sell while their value is high. You have to look at Owen Power. You have to, I think, at least entertain the idea of JJ Paterka, right? I don't, if you're going to talk about trading Quinn or Cousins, Paterka should be lumped into that
I'm
same
saving
boat.
Paterka for the Brady Kachuk deal, so he can go play with Stutzla. I'm saving Paterka for that deal.
That would be a nice one.
No, but here's the thing. So on Pedersen, though, right? Like, what's the downfall by pursuing a player like that? You got a big number. He's not performing. I guess, is the downfall that he's going to be just a diminished asset? Like, he's never going to come back to his previous. He's 26 years old, and I don't know, man. Like, I'm all about that. Knowing the struggle that Kevin Adams has to make a deal. If you can get that deal done, you got to go. And I would think that he can rebound. I see so much good that could come with it. He could help Cousins. All these things that are maybe on Cousins' shoulders, maybe some of that weight shifts. You bring Pedersen in. Pedersen's not crazy older. He's 26, but he's been there, done that. He's got a lot of games under his belt. He's got a good two-way game.
He's had a 100-point season.
Yeah.
He's got a relationship with Dahlin, which I think.
Who's Dahlin's boy right now on the team?
That's
Exactly.
a good question. It's a good question. I'm not sure. That. I mean, Casey Middlestat was his guy, and
okay,
and he's gone. I mean, Zach Benson was his tenant there for a little while. I mean, Rasmus Dahlin's kind of the. I guess if he has a guy, it would probably be like Matthias Samuelsson, maybe. But they were defensive partners for a bit. I think got along pretty well. It seems like he's starting to mesh with Bo Byram pretty well, but they are lacking well, they don't have another Swede on the roster, do they? Am I missing somebody?
No, Olofsson bounced.
Bounced. Wahlberg's in the system, but
Wahlberg and Ostlund are down, and yeah, they're a while away. Like, let's not even think about them.
So it's a good point by you that, and another guy who I think he's ready for the captaincy. I think he's a worthy captain, but again, this guy that has a tendency to get in his own head a little bit, right? And maybe try, like with Cousins and Dahlin, getting in their head is like they're trying too hard, right? They're forcing things. They're just not. They're just trying too hard. They feel like they have to do it all themselves sometimes, and so maybe there is something to that finding somebody. Look, I imagine it can start. The dynamic shifts, right? He's the guy that hosts all the parties, and he's got the big house, he's got the big contract. Now he's the captain. Like, the dynamic shifts a little bit from when you were one of the young guys just hanging out in your apartment playing video games with Casey Middlestat. Like, so finding some guys, some running mates for him in that regard, some peers, some countrymen, I think that's a nice little added dynamic.
Dahlin, big house, big contract, big impact on this team.
Major.
This is coming back. Big contract. Big impact. I meant that was. I don't know. It's not Freudian, but that was like, whoa. I must be stuck on the contract in the back of my head. Hey, 37 minutes in, Baker Fairburn Hockey Show is here, following the Sabres 4-0 victory over Ottawa. If you missed us on the way in, if you could please hit that like button, we appreciate it. If you're watching on X, come on over to YouTube. The chat's moving on this late night edition. Good to see some people in the chat as always. We thank everyone for hopping in. Matthew, so, you make a move like that, say you can get that done. That's a big move. Big move, right? You get a guy like that. And then the task for Kevin Adams, again, he's the GM. So everyone's going to have their opinion on whether or not he should be the one making the moves and pulling the strings moving forward. We got time to talk about that. Maybe not tonight, but the Sabres GM then is tasked with filling out the roster, right? Veterans, kind of correcting some of the mistakes that were made in the past. And we've seen this new little mechanism, this little lever that's being pulled now with contracts, with deferred money. And the only thing that I wrote down, so our longtime viewers and listeners of this show know that we like to do a show sheet. There is really no show sheet tonight. But the only thing that I wrote down was deferred money. Is this a way that Kevin Adams can lure in veteran talent and compete against New York's high taxes? And it's kind of an interesting concept, right? Veteran talent. We saw this deferred money mechanism come in place with Vetrano this week. Kind of an interesting one, right? The thought was he gets all this deferred money way down the line when he's not going to be living in California, pretty much after his playing days, right? And we saw with Seth Jarvis, I think. Didn't Seth Jarvis, was he the guy who took some deferred money? A couple other ones, I think, right? It's starting to pop up more. Kind of interesting. Do you think that that's something that the Sabres would do? It makes a hell of a lot of sense, doesn't it? To get maybe some of those been there, done that guys to look at Buffalo?
I think so. I mean, between the tax situation and even the, from a pure spending standpoint, like pushing some of that down the road, helping out the the cap hit. I'm curious how the league is going to look at it down the road. It seems like, from reading the reporting on the Vetrano deal, that the Ducks were in communication with the league every step of the way, wanted to make sure they weren't overstepping and wanted to make sure that everything was good to go. It doesn't strike me that the league is thrilled about this, or that even the PA would be necessarily thrilled about this. Agents probably don't love it because they'd rather get their money sooner rather than later. But it's something that Kevin Adams, I think, should absolutely be thinking about and trying, because like California, you're in that spot where if you can push the money beyond somebody's playing career and they go retire somewhere else, they're probably going to have a more favorable tax situation, unless they're going to retire in California. They're probably going to save some money. Now, it's an interesting debate too. I think some players view it as they'd rather have the money now. I think a lot of players probably view it that way because you can put the money in the market. You can, get a, good enough return that you're not worried about whatever you saved in taxes because you made it up while you were playing and still earning. So not every guy's going to go for it, I guess is my point, but I think it's something Kevin Adams needs to be trying. I mean, you need to get creative. As he outlined in that press conference, there are obstacles here, obstacles everyone's aware of, right? And so if you're not trying to get creative, then you're not doing your job. Like, the obstacles are there in part because of things this organization has done. They're there in part because they've always been there, right? Like, Buffalo's always been a smaller market, a colder market. New York's taxes, well, I don't know the exact history of New York taxes, but, it's not a new phenomenon. So these are things that have always been there. You got to find ways to get creative. And I think you see some of the best teams in every league doing that, right? Finding little loopholes, ways to cut corners. And you absolutely have to do that when you're a smaller market team with some of the disadvantages that the Sabres have.
It's kind of funny, like the agents want their money, but it's not like any of these guys connected to any of these contracts are going to be called JG Wentworth, I have a deferred contract. Like, that's not happening. Like, I think it's okay. But who am I to say? It's their money, not mine, but whatever. Man, I can't believe, I was just looking at the calendar and it's like 42 games in, man. We survived the halfway point of the season. My highlight, by the way, this is just kind of, I'm going off the beaten path here, but it's just like anecdotally, what my highlight of the season in a weird way. So it was December 15th, actually. You were driving up to Toronto, up the QEW. You know where I'm going with this, right? You were driving up the QEW. You and I were on the phone chatting. I was keeping you company on your short drive up. And you're like, oh man, a hearse just passed me. We were like, that's the Sabres season.
There it went. That was game. Was that lost 10, I think?
Yeah.
10 or 11. That was the night
it was 10.
That Lindy
No,
Rupp
actually it was 11. Yeah.
called it his toughest solve.
Yeah.
And it got only tougher from there because a couple days later, Terry Pagula met the team in Montreal. They had that horrible game against the Canadiens. It was symbolic for sure. It felt that way.
How's it make you feel when a hearse rolls past you and when you're driving in technically a foreign country?
It's a little odd to see him out in the wild, right? Not as part of the, it gives you a little pause, makes you wonder. I almost had to do a double take when we were on the phone. I'm like, I think that's sure enough.
People across the street from me had someone that visited their house that was in the funeral business and would park in front of my house on the street, the hearse. They would drive like a hearse. And I'd get like texts like, hey man, is everything okay? And it's kind of funny if you're texting me. I'm the only one who lives in this house, right? FYI, right? It's like you're texting me like to see if I'm dead. It's kind of a weird strategy, maybe, I don't know, text someone else in my family.
Text
but that was always funny.
Tito.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd take a picture of it and be like, contrary to popular belief, I'm still here. At any rate, I don't know how I got on the dead talk. We're 45 in. This was intended. We intended this to be a short show tonight. Kind of ease our way back in after a little bit of a holiday break. Let's just do some housekeeping real quick. Kulik injury update. Anything? What do we
He's
got?
on IR. He's week to week with a lower body injury, which is unfortunate because he was kind of really coming on. I thought, before that injury, felt
Yeah.
like he was impacting games on a nightly basis and finding his scoring touch, but not. It's never, I don't think, the worst thing in the world when a rookie gets to take a breather. And, obviously you'd rather that happen under different circumstances, but provided, they don't have an exact timetable on it. So you're hoping it's nothing major that's going to require surgery or anything like that. But for now, no reason for major alarm, just a bummer because he was playing well and was one of the few guys on the team for a while there that made the games worth watching, right? Like he was one of those guys that, gave you a little bit of optimism about what's going on. Him and Benson, had a good little run for a while, but so he's out. Greenway's still out. Like you mentioned earlier, Mallenstein and Samuelson were sick. Thompson fighting through something that he's playing through, but those are most of the injuries off the top of my head, other than Henry Haru, who's playing, took a puck to the face or a stick to the face or something like that in that game against the Capitals and had to wear the shield. Other than that, it's back at it on Saturday against the Seattle Kraken. And then they don't play again until Wednesday against the Carolina Hurricanes. And then I believe they play Pittsburgh a week from tomorrow. And then they head out west for Seattle, Vancouver, Calgary, and Edmonton. That western swing. And before we know it, the Four Nations pause will be here. And there'll be a little gap on the schedule.
You excited for that? You care about that? Where are you at with the Four Nations?
I am excited in part to have the little breather on the schedule. It's always nice, a little bye week action. But I will watch. I think I'm curious about the level of investment from the players, and asking a few guys. I think guys are lukewarm on it, especially guys that aren't playing. Like it doesn't mean to them what the Olympics would mean or even what the World Juniors meant when they were in that age bracket. But it will be a taste of best on best hockey that we just haven't had for so long. So I think my curiosity is going in that regard because the rosters are so new and so different from the last time they did this that, it'll be worth watching from that standpoint. But the level of investment, I think, from the players, it feels like more of a warm up to the Olympics, if anything.
I think that's what it's actually that was the plan. But I don't know. I'm not there yet. I kind of don't care too much. We'll see. It's even the Olympics, like as long as the one thing that gets me with this is like it's played on the North American sized rink. When they play that like on big ice, like Olympics, when they played that was probably a decade ago now, or I've probably longer than that. Played on the big, it was just it seemed boring. No intensity, too much space. Game didn't seem as fast, bang bang, but whatever. I'll work on improving my attitude for the Four Nations. But until then, don't give a shit.
Not a lot of Sabre ties either, right? You got Dahlin playing for Sweden, and you've got Luukkonen on Finland, but probably won't play, I wouldn't think, with Saros being on that roster as well. So maybe Thompson gets a look if there's an injury, but, he's also banged up. So it's like, I don't know. That's going to be the other interesting piece of this is, you're almost guaranteed that somebody will get hurt, right? And so it's going to be an interesting time on the NHL calendar as far as is there going to be a rush to maybe get some deals done before the Four Nations break, or GM's going to use that time to get the framework of some deals in place? You don't usually get that breather on the schedule ahead of the trade deadline. So I don't know. I'll be interested to watch it just to gauge the intensity, gauge the buy-in from players and how much they really care, because they're going to care next year when the Olympics roll around.
Last thing, you just mentioned deals, and it's kind of popped back into my head. There was this another thing that was just kind of lingering before the holiday freeze, and then after. Some of your peers in the media, I think it was, Friedman, maybe some others, maybe even CJ with The Athletic, they were talking about Detroit and Buffalo talking. Have you heard anything recently on that? Has it died out? Where do you suspect or know things are at on that front?
Nothing more than, what you mentioned. I don't know if it's died out necessarily. It strikes me that there's going to be plenty of that between Kevin Adams and, quite a few teams that are circling. As we spoke about with the Red Wings, it's hard to find a deal that makes a ton of sense. I think there was reporting this week from Friedman that Cousins was who Detroit was looking at and asking about. So, what does a deal like that even look like, that could just be Steve Yzerman trying to take advantage of a desperate situation. But
And
I
they
don't
have
know
Nate
if there's any teeth
Danielson
there.
there too. Like they have a player that's kind of like Cousins-y, Yzerman-y. That's interesting. Okay.
But we'll see. I think
Everyone's looking at Cousins. Okay.
everybody's interested in Cousins, which, hey, maybe that makes the price such that you would think about it. But just because everybody's calling doesn't mean you need to trade him.
Yeah, and like, from my comment why I just said, oh, they got a guy like this, why do they need him? No, you can have more than one guy like that. And frankly, I'd rather the Sabres had a couple more guys like that. So I get the appeal there. Okay, that's interesting. All right, we're not going to make it to an hour, right? We want this to be a short show. I'm going to start working our way out of here. You guys can find Matthew Fairburn's work at theathletic.com/Sabres. If you didn't get an Athletic subscription from Santa Claus or Hanukkah Harry or whoever drops off gifts for the holidays, you can definitely get one over there. I always recommend to my friends that if you're not a subscriber and you go and you read one of Matthew's stories and you kind of subscribe through Matthew's story, I think that looks good when Matthew has his annual performance review. And anything else that you want to add on top of that plug, Matthew?
I just want to shout out Jim Soupy Campbell in the chat was providing live updates on the Notre Dame Penn State game, which was a big help since I don't have eyes on my TV right now. So sounds like it was a big win for the Irish. So
wow.
Shout out to Soupy. Shout out to Soupy for the updates. And
still alive for a
big
natty,
help.
huh?
Still alive for a natty. This is a Notre Dame household. My brother went to Notre Dame, so been to some games out there, and not my primary college football rooting interest, but got to root for family, right?
I've been to one Notre Dame football game. It was at Michigan State. It was a night game, rain, Brady Quinn, Samardzija, right? Tight end.
My brother,
it was a night game
in the game too. Yeah.
It was raining like the whole second half. It was crazy. Earlier that day, so we did the doubleheader, did a Michigan game at noon against Wisconsin at the Big House, and then went over to East Lansing and did that. It was fun. Fun day. Long day.
That was the era my brother was there. So I saw some Samardzija games as well. He was a heck of a player.
Had to be 2005, 2006, somewhere around there. I want to probably a little, maybe even 07. It was in that area. Because I remember where I was working, what I was doing. I remember, telling my boss, I'm like, I'm out. Peace. All right. Anyways, I'm Kris Baker. You can find me on X at Sabres Prospects. I will eventually at some point here get another episode of Prospect Avenue out. We're well overdue for a World Junior debrief. We could have done it here, but we'll get to it. A lot of good stuff there coming out of that tournament. Fun tournament. Again, USA back-to-back. First time in the history of that tournament that the USA's won that gold medal back-to-back. So good on those boys. And Brody Zemer, we're looking at him being captain of Team USA next year. That's the early prediction from the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show. All right, I'm going to take us out of here, Matthew. Thanks, everyone, for hopping in. If you didn't hit that like button, please do so on your way out. For Matthew Fairburn from The Athletic, for the production crew who's out freezing. Man, it was like 15 degrees today. 16 presently right now here in Hamburg, New York. I'm Kris Baker. We'll see you again next time.